Thank you very much for being back after the lunch and right on time. Okay, we have a very interesting panel this afternoon about social impact assessment. I think that all of us agree on the general principles about social impact and the importance of to have an impact, a good impact on the society with our research. The problems come when we start to think about what is that of social impact and how can we measure or assess social impact, because the problems are in the details. I think that the three presenters will deal with this topic from different angles. I think that interesting and complementary angles. I think that we will enjoy it. The first is Jack Stappen. He's independent research and policy advisor from the Netherlands. And he will talk about strengthening the societal impact of social science and humanities research via bottom-up development of indicators.
Thank you. Is it working? Yeah, I think so. Buenas tardes a todos. Gracias a Tony para invitarme en esta maravillosa ciudad y excelente universidad. And that's about all the Spanish you get from me. I can understand it a little bit and speak less, but okay. So I'm going to explain the title of this presentation. First of all, societal impact. I like to talk about societal impact instead of social impact, because social impact is, in my mind, a bit narrower. Societal impact is how research affects society, socially, culturally, economically, technically, etc., etc. So that's broader, and I think that is better. Think of the internet, of social media, how that affects. That's not only a social effect, but a lot of other effects too. The bottom-up development of indicators, what I mean with that is that we like to involve all stakeholders in developing not only indicators but evaluation systems. And we see that as a consequence of the fact that nowadays problems in society are so big that solutions can not only come from science, but a lot of other social sectors are involved in trying to solve all these problems. And a few more things we have chosen, and I'll explain that later, and I promise I will do that, for a holistic approach, or maybe a comprehensive approach, in the sense that we try to find a balance between, let's say, the more traditional way of looking at science and the science indicators, the bibliometrics, etc., and the societal impact of research. And that's not an easy job, and it takes really a lot of time. We like to focus on the content of research and not just on numbers. And we don't like ranking so much, but we like to understand what people are up to, whether they're in science or in other social sectors. So this is a little bit of the background, and I will go through my slides rather quickly, because a lot has already been said this morning in all the excellent presentations that we've seen, and I don't have to repeat all that. So I'm going to make three basic statements. First of all, the last 10, 15 years, there's really big changes in the context of academic research. and something everybody knows, I think. It's probably best visible in the way research is funded these days. Just as an example from the Netherlands, in, let's say, 2 decades ago, 70 or 80% of research money came from the government and was public money. Now, in most cases, it's less than 50% and even less than 40%. And in some fields, people are almost without public money if they want to do the research they think is important. The most current evaluation systems, that's my second statement, and methods are not fit for this new context, meaning a context where research, science, academic science is only part of a much larger innovation process. And the third statement is that academics or the academic systems are at a crossroads between international competition and collaboration, which is sometimes international, but more often it's local or regional or national. I think we need to adapt these evaluation systems. They have to become more comprehensive, so not focus too much on 1 or 2 or 3 indicators just because we have the data for these indicators. There should be much more balance between academic quality evaluation and societal relevance evaluation. There should be much more attention in the evaluation for interaction with the stakeholders, how that is organized and what it leads to. And the knowledge in evaluation system should be much more about the content of what people are trying to do and trying to achieve and with whom they are trying to do that, than over judgment and trying to organize ranking systems. This is just one example. I'm sure you all know this. These are the Sustainable Development Goals. Just looking at that without going into them, you see that these are very complex processes that need input from a lot of different angles and a lot of collaboration between societies, between countries. This is also familiar for you, I think. This is the Horizon 2020. We've heard this morning about the new program, which is not a revolution, but an evolution. So it's sort of the same way, made simpler here and there. In the Grand Societal Challenges, for instance, it's now 5 instead of these 7, I think. And there is also something that I think is very important, responsible research and innovation. But I think it's not so easy to find that back in policies in most countries. But this is basically, I talked to the guy von Schoenberg, who defined this responsible research and innovation. And he said that basically what they were trying to do was to implement in research and innovation policy a set of standard European values that were usually at the basis of most European policies, but strangely enough not of research and innovation policy. So he thought it was time to bring that also in the equation. Oops, no, this way. This is the crossroads that we are looking at if we work in universities and also in other institutions, as far as they are assessed through public money organizations. And it's difficult for researchers because, especially when you're a young researcher, you're really pushed into a certain system that some describe as publish or perish. You have to publish in international journals, and you have to look at the rankings, and you have to take part in all kind of research. And it is not always good for science, and it's not always good for society, and it's not always good for the researchers. There's in the Netherlands a movement called Science in Transition, which started in the medical hospital in Utrecht, which is also merged with the faculty, the medical faculty. And the dean of that organization started this Science in Transition because he saw that especially the young researchers and the PhD researchers, they were just forced into a system that was not very productive in the sense of producing new ideas, new science, and not good in connecting with problems in society. We've heard that in the speech this morning by Kajsa. And he saw that there was hardly any room for young people to come up with original ideas that could only be followed if it somehow fits in existing programs. There was hardly any room because it would take too much time, it was too risky. PhD students, when they finish in the Netherlands, they get a bonus. I mean, not the student themselves, but it goes to the faculty, over 100,000 euros. So they just didn't want to take that risk. So this is one of the perverse effects of focusing too much on publishing. Anyways, the researchers are squeezed between this urge for international excellence, international competition, etc., and local collaboration. And there's a lot of misunderstandings there because doesn't mean that collaborating with local industry or local patient groups or whatever is leading to less interesting or less quality research. But it's not the way you earn your points or your currency in the academic system. And a third thing is that I think that the importance of social science and humanities research is underestimated. And in a way that's very strange, because if you look at the last 10 years or so, most of the big world problems are in the area of social science and humanities. Just think of the economic crisis, the financial crisis. We might think now in Europe that we are better off now, but I can promise you that the next crisis is sooner than later, because the system doesn't really change. And there's, of course, the whole migration issue. There is the issue of, defense, security, etc. These are big issues, and you need a lot of knowledge coming from social science and humanities to deal with that. It seemed to going the wrong way. This is how it. This is a graphic representation. It's not based on any empirical data. But this is how you can see the innovation process. So 10, 15 years ago, there was, when you look at problems or issues in society, you see all these big societal sectors, look at that problem from their own comfort zone and trying to come with solutions, but hardly communicating. And on the right side of the picture, you see how the situation is now. They're sort of closing into the question and issue. They have to leave their comfort zone. They have to talk to other social sectors and find ways to coexist, to co-work, to go collaborate, to address these problems. Now, this is an interesting study it's an exploratory study from the Rathenau Institute. They said, given all these changes in the context, what can we expect for future universities and how to evaluate these future universities? And they talked to a lot of rectors and work group leaders and students and policymakers, etc. And they came up with 4 models, if you wish, or 4 focus points that you see here that would be of value and interest for future policies of universities. And they indeed saw also 2 uncertainties, as we call it. Competition or collaboration was one of them, But the other thing was who owns the universities, because with all the incoming private money, the question is whether the universities can still remain in their public functions that they had for a long time. Now the thing is that if you look at these four options, and you would think that universities would choose which focus of the four they will choose, you get a very different profile. Again, this is not empirical data, but this is based on the interviews and on asking the interviewees what kind of indicators would be important to take along in the more comprehensive evaluation of universities. And this is hardly readable, probably, so I made them a little bit larger. They saw 5 important functions of university: education and science, that makes sense, contact with businesses or the professional world, and the broader government and societal questions. And they try to paint a picture of what a profile would look if university would choose for one of the 4 options, and you see you get very different profiles. So the conclusion is that if you want to evaluate universities in this comprehensive way, I don't know if it's already your 5.0, but you have to reckon that just focusing on a few, 2 or 3 indicators is not enough, and it's not really representing the development in universities. Now, these are just examples. You can come up with other indicators if you wish, but 2 minutes? 2 minutes, wow. But I need 5 minutes more at least. I can steal a few minutes, I think. I will skip this. This is the national evaluation system. Very simple in a way. There are 3 indicator categories to be developed bottom-up: output indicators, use indicators, and recognition indicators. And there are 2 assessment categories: scientific quality and societal quality. And we don't have a peer review system. We have an extended peer review system, meaning that we allow for other than scientists or researchers to come into the evaluation. This is the thing that local groups have to do to prepare for this evaluation, to come up with a narrative that combines societal impact and scientific goals in a way. And we asked the research fields to come up with indicators that they think are important for their field. And what I now want to do, if I am allowed to do that, but I don't know how I should do that, I want to get to that website.
Ça serait plutôt ouvert l'ordinateur.
I think it works.
Oh, it's going, yeah.
There you go. We developed a website, and this is a very long-term process. We started more than 2 years ago. We are now sort of halfway. And this is meant as a tool for evaluation committees to do a comprehensive evaluation for humanities research, but ideally all fields in science should come up with something like this. And I'm not sure how to manipulate this. No, yeah, okay, that's good. A little bit more. So these are the 6 categories that we have in the National Evaluation Protocol. And then if you just go to societal products, can you do that? Or can I do it? Yes. So, yeah, and then professional products, can you do that? Okay, so here's a list of indicators. Yeah, that's enough. And we've done that for all the categories. And you can click on these indicators, and then you will see a description of the indicator and some kind of assessment of how valuable it is if you want to do this comprehensive evaluation. Now, I have to tell you, we are halfway, so a lot of these indicators are not fully elaborated yet. there's still discussion going on between people in each and any different field. But we are raising awareness that you can evaluate research in a much more comprehensive way than is done in most systems these days. And it's also good to say that the research community have accepted the fact that a lot of these indicators will not be quantitative indicators. Of course, if you look at books or articles, you can think of a quantitative indicator, but digital infrastructure or films or websites or things like that, designs, it doesn't make sense to come up with quantitative indicators. So then you have to find a more qualitative way to say something meaningful about these indicators. And then the idea is that in the evaluation process, you don't come up with, because there are in the whole system maybe 100 different indicators, but you choose and pick those indicators that are most relevant for the work you're doing. And you build a good narrative that is supported by these indicators. And it's not only the effect that people are then getting more confidence in their work and how they can present it, it's also that that the evaluators are, as far as we know now, are really happy with this system, because the discussion then goes about much more about the content than about numbers, and that's then I think the basic goal we have with this system. But again, it takes a long time, and it's basically because we decided from the beginning that we wanted to involve, to engage the research community and also the policymakers. And I think the first 1.5 years, we needed to convince these people that this would be a way to deal with evaluation in a much more meaningful way than was done before, with the focus on only a few indicators. I'm sorry I don't have the time to go into all the details, but you can look up the website, and I'm always happy to discuss and also have your input if you think that something is ridiculous or excellent or whatever. Please let us know, because we are hoping that we can not only use this in the Netherlands but also set a trend for humanities and social sciences in Europe too. So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Yes, thanks. Peter offline is will have the second presentation. Peter comes from the Institute of Development Studies. We have some in common because it's my second academic home. Peter will deal with methodologies and tools to assess.
Different one with a funny one.
Great then. There's this and then that should.
Yeah, I think this should be on the top. Oh. Oh, yeah, sorry, up here.
Okay.
I made some light edits. Apologies, everyone.
Darling, double click.
Don't panic.
Do you have, no, don't panic. Do you have the pen again?
The
The pen drive.
oh,
Pen drive? Sorry. Yeah, it's here.
No,
No,
that's
this,
that's
yeah.
after.
But the next.
Here is
No,
this one.
no.
This is Tony.
This
This is yours. Do you think
yeah,
it's
but
the
that's-
last version?
No, it's not the last version, but
No.
we'll make do. I'll just chat out my conclusions.
Great.
You'll see the final slide will have notes for Tony and everyone, so what am I going to finalise on, but alas, we'll make do. Social impact measurement, an overview, again, this is the reason why there was another version, an overview of assessment methodologies and tools for social impact measurement. And so I'm from the Institute of Development Studies, and I'll be taking a little bit of a different tack with this presentation because I'm less familiar with the Research Institute architecture. The research I did came about as a result of looking at the field of impact investing, i.e. those businesses or investors that were looking to invest with a social and environmental return alongside their financial returns, and how they engaged in social impact measurement in that regard to make sure they're all effective. So what am I going to cover? Well, first of all, how you define your social impact, and a brief categorization of various social impact measurement approaches, and how you would do, and some of the approaches ex ante, ex post, and then a strengths and weaknesses of those methodologies. Furthermore, a categorization of the standards of evidence required and what we're trying to achieve or what we're trying to expect. And then I'm just going to finish with a little note about complexity and standards. Hope that's all right. These are quite different slides. This is a version a long time ago. Yes, please. Sorry. Shall we grab the pen drive?
Kind of impact?
Gotta have the wrong kind of impact. Sorry. Shall I use? Oh, it's just yeah, I'll say on there.
Se ha levantado el técnico.
Cuando ves la presentación, dale a cancelarlo de los vídeos.
Ah, vale. Pero... ¿qué dices? No, pero ahí estaba.
Cancelar.
Let's see if this is the
Is
right
this
one.
Yeah.
Yeah? Try to go...
I'm
Go
just
farther with the pointer.
moving it over now. Let's see.
The problem with the computers is always the same.
Every time.
That's why we cannot let them take over. Humans should be in charge.
I'm a computer scientist, so I know which are the problems and how to manage it.
Only 15 minutes, but we can't do anything about that now. Anyway, but we'll carry on. So defining your defining your social impact. Well, there's a range of definitions for what social impact actually means. It's actually something that we probably should have covered this morning in more detail. But what principles should it really engage? Well, it should really incorporate both the positive and negative impacts that occur in any of its guises. And to some extent, it should account for the differential impact that is seen between different groups. So, for a basic understanding of who wins and who loses. It should highlight a chain of probable causality and should be effective and should be able to be aggregated in order so that it can be functioning as part of these university management systems and effectively holds those responsible for creating impact responsible for feedback. So I'm really keen on this definition here by the group of European experts of the European Commission for Social Entrepreneurship, which reads, the reflection of social outcomes as measurement, both long-term and short-term, adjusted for the effects achieved by others, so alternative attribution, for effects that would have happened anyway, dead weight, and for negative consequences, and for effects declining over time. And so there's a couple of really important concepts there that we should be taking forward in our discussion. And so what are we talking about when we have all the different social impact measurement tools? Well, essentially, a lot of academics have tried to put them in various different processes and different ways, but I think, you know, one of the main things is that social impact has been measured in a way that sometimes involves monetization and putting a direct cost to them. There's a survey approach, there's the participatory approaches, there's qualitative tools, and there's the statistical tools and counterfactuals. But all of them inevitably come with their own relative strengths and weaknesses, and which we will run through. But essentially, what do we mean by social impact? Well, it's a theory-based activity. We're looking at ex ante, what is the change that we're trying to create on the world? And this is something that I wanted to bring forward in the discussions later on. It's the fact that how do we orientate ourselves so that we design for social impact from the outset when we engage in our research projects, rather than research projects being having social impact measurement as a tag on, and to make it and stop it from being a box ticking exercise. And so the EC current practice of impact assessment considers efficiency, effectiveness, and coherence. But essentially, you know, we need to understand what is the driver and understanding of the change that we want to make. So here we present a number of tools for ex ante assessment, and so understanding again in theory will clearly involve some element of theory of change approach and a logic causality towards what the impact the researcher is really trying to make on the world, trying to understand what are the critical pathways that would enable that change to result. Most significant change is trying to be reductivist about this, because there's lots of different social impacts that might be a result. So if we were to focus on one indicator, what would that necessarily mean? Then you see the simulation modeling, but then you have a range of RCT, historical baseline, pre-post test, difference and difference. These are all the statistical potential tools that we can use for ultimately assessing our project. Then we go into the world of monetization. Social return on investment is a social tool that tries to encapsulate all the positive and negative consequences by societal group. And it's quite keen, it's very different from cost-benefit analysis below, because it seeks to involve all the major stakeholders in terms of trying to understand what the social impact is and let them be a part of the process, where it's trying to monetize into one figure for an understanding. And then, as we've discussed participatory methods, the best alternative charitable option was a tool used by Acumen Group, which is a social impact investor in the UK, in the about 3-4 years ago, and trying to really understand what it, for our project, which is ultimately supposed to have a social return, what would the social return be relative to the next best charitable option? I'm sorry, we don't have enough time to go through these in more detail, but we can probably go through them a little bit afterwards if we want. So, but what are the strengths and weaknesses of these social impact measurement methodologies? And given my experience in the social impact investing sector, well, where have these actors seen the most applicability and use? So you have across the top there estimating impact, your planning of impact, your monitoring and your evaluation of impact, and the relative strength of each different tool in trying to understand its effects. So whilst theories of change are very good for planning and estimating, or trying to, well, qualitatively estimate your level of impact, if they're not managed effectively and are not living documents, they're not very good at monitoring impact and ultimately evaluating. Similarly, well, scorecards are very effective at the planning stage and monitoring stage, but they incur several weaknesses in terms of their ability to mass aggregate data, and if they're not used effectively with qualitative tools as well. So this is me really making a call for mixed methods when it comes to social impact measurement assessment systems. And essentially, this is the summary, again, of what I was trying to say at the top there. Are they effective at measuring impact? Are they effective at measuring differential impacts between different groups? All these different approaches have their relative strengths and weaknesses. Some are particularly good at aggregating, some are very good at delivering levels of accountability, and others are weaker in various areas. And so once again, this call for tools may come through. But we talked a little bit about participatory methods and its relative use. And so some methods are clearly going to be more participative than others. Others are more integrated approach, and that can be covered at each level of stage. But essentially, the message I'm trying to give is that we're going to have to find systems that are the best of the system, best that we can make available to ourselves. But we need to have high standards of evidence for that. And so what I'm providing here is a very simplified guidance for standards of evidence provided by Innovation Foundation in the UK, which is Nesta Group. And these 5 levels, I think, are a really effective way for researchers to kind of think, how am I systematically going to think about impact? Can I give the account of the likely causal chain and how it's likely to improve? Or can I show some level of data that will actually improve the level of process and product? And can that be replicated through means such as fidelity evaluation? But ultimately, we are complex people in complex systems, and the university system is ultimately more complex than most, and the European Commission. So here we've got, you note that all of these are boxes. These are all moving parts that we're trying to get at, and the fact that is that social impact doesn't happen on a constant linear track over time whenever you engage in your investment. There may be network effects that come about. There may be discontinuous change. There may be tipping points, and essentially, or unpredictable consequences. And ultimately, that means that we need to think about systems that can be responsive and reflective of those underlying changes. And so the intention is to be not so reductive that when we create if a scorecard is to be created and those indicators and metrics at a project level for researchers, that should there be substantial change, that measurement and time and resource can be made available. And having rushing through, just a little quick cautionary tale, and this is about the Choluteca Bridge, which was built in Honduras in 1996. So this was a bridge that was built, and it really kind of screams to me the tale of disruption. Yeah, and the fact is that you can build the best social impact measurement system that you've ever seen, but ultimately, if the hurricane comes and alters the flow of the water, and you've got a hurricane-proof bridge, it may be completely lost. So we need to, again, it's another call for being both reflexive and trying to plan ahead most effectively. So, what conclusions could I make? So there's a range of, so I very quickly ran through the social impact measurement tools that are available, but for any researcher that is thinking what evaluation tool is best suitable, I provide a link there, which I imagine these slides are going to be shared for Barbara Bafani, which is the appropriate evaluation methods tool, which is actually an Excel sheet, and it goes for a number of different questions relative to what social impact are you trying to create, or what is the nature of the study that you are conducting, and therefore we'll try and tell you the best evaluation approach for managing that. And then number 2, designing for social impact key from the outset. If you're not designing your research study from the frame of social impact, and then it's seen as an add-on when you're part of the university system, it may be harder to articulate the social change that is coming about as a result. If it's an aim from the outset, that's a very different deal. Thirdly, acknowledge complexity and the role of those factors. And if you're applying any scorecard approaches, the impact investing industry has used something called IRIS, which is the Impact Reporting and Investment Standards, which for social projects has a range of about 2,000 different indicators, which may be useful, and it's already completed in a standardized format. So in some sense, that would be able to compare research outputs against investor outputs as well to show the relative returns. And finally, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, Marie Bouchard will be the next presenter. She is full professor at the University du Québec, Montreal, and a member of the Center for Research and Social Innovation. And she will focus more on the researcher level, to the individual level, the implications for our work.
Thank you for this introduction. Thank you, Tony, for inviting me. I thought I was an imposter when I was talking to Tony. I am not someone who evaluates research or social impacts of research, but I am someone who has hands in the dough and experience with sticky hands and finding other hands in the dough and not knowing what recipe is in this bowl and discovering that you can do bread without kneading with new recipes. So this is the point of view I'm going to be taking. Also, I share some of the skepticism or some of the preoccupation for the quality of what we call impact measurement. And I really appreciate the two presentators that gave a lot of seriousness to the subject. It's not only that what is not measured doesn't count, but a lot of what counts cannot be measured. That is Einstein. So I like to refer to people who are important. In my daily life, I spend a lot of time in the Centre de Recherche sur les Innovations Sociales, Center for Research on Social Innovation. I also spend time on my computer talking to people around the world because I'm with Syriac International, which is a partnership association with public and cooperative and social economy enterprises. I spent 10 years in CURA, a Community University Research Alliance, in which I was co-responsible with someone from the civil society of one of the groups which was on community habitat. I was offered to take a very an equivalent of CNRS in France, a chaire du Canada en économie sociale, which was a recognition of scientific quality. I didn't understand why, because I had my hands in the dough all these years. It didn't make sense. And all these experiences, the latest one that we have is TIES, Territoire Innovant en Économie Sociale et Solidaire, which is an organization of liaison and transfer in social innovation, and it's dedicated to social and solidarity economy. We don't do research there. We're not allowed to call anything that we do research. The only thing we do is transfer. I also have a day job. I'm paid for being a professor at Université du Québec à Montréal, which I spend some time in my office. The beauty of partnership research, it can, of course, lead to both excellence of research and social impact. In the field of social innovation, a lot of what partnership research manages to help doing, I hear the volume maybe is too loud on this, I don't know. Since we're looking at things that are new, emerging, that don't know exactly what field they belong to, they are experimenting, they are producing things that they don't know how to call. A lot of our work is to codify with the social actor. But we're also doing research, so we problematize, as we say in French. We conceptualize, we connect this work to a research issue. So we need to find the connection between what's going on in the field and what research is at. And of course, our job is to produce knowledge. And if we stop doing knowledge production, then I don't know if we're doing our job. Maybe we're doing somebody else's job, consultancy job, whatever. But if we're not knowing that we're doing, that we're producing knowledge, we need to question ourselves. For the partner, the partner, as mentioned previously, can be the driving force behind the project. Hence, the partner becomes a co-constructor, a co-builder of the research objects. The project, the partner already has an objective, knows where he wants to go, knows why he wants a researcher, or thinks he knows, or she knows. But when we start saying, well, this is a research, it's not just applying a well-known methodology to a new subject to find an answer, is to produce new knowledge. So then the partner has to change perspectives in a way. Often the partner will be co-producing the research, so we'll have a process that is lengthy, a lot of meetings, a lot of new partners coming in, some partners coming out, some partners saying, let's change our minds and do something else because something else came up. So this is the reality of how it happens. And the partner is often very active in co-diffusing the results, of course, if the results satisfy the partner. Or if the timing is good to divulgate the results. So sometimes you have moratory on publications, which in research, you've already spent a lot of time meeting with this partner, changing the subject, evolving in this co-creation process, and all of a sudden you have a moratory on publication, which you understand because you are with the partner. You know very well why this publication needs to wait. Of course, it helps excellency of research because you have direct access to people, to data, to fields of research, which is sometimes, when you're on top of your ivory tower, a little difficult, it seems, for some researcher to climb down this ivory tower, come out in the field and find the people. If you're doing partner research, they're knocking at your door all the time. Or you're living with them, as I do in many of the cases. It helps build collective intelligence. So we are forced to work in multidisciplinary frameworks, though we still will need to publish in our discipline. So we keep pushing the boundaries of our own disciplines when we are producing, which is part of innovative research as well. And of course, because the partner has access to what we're doing, the data is open, the results are open, there's co-ownership of the results. Sometimes that can create interesting tensions, and I'll come back later to some recommendations. In terms of social impact, this type of research ensures you that you will have collaboration from civil society rather than opposition to your research project, because they're in there with you. Social relevancy, so you can track that down in your rapport d'activité sociale de l'université. It will be a good point. And of course, because the partners are already involved in the process, you might assist a more rapid social change issuing from the research. Well, there are some caveats or some difficulties also. For the researcher, the question of autonomy and independence is quite crucial. And at certain points, you wonder, am I still autonomous? When my partner is telling me more or less where to go and where to not go. This is precious because I don't want to be knocking on doors that will never open, but I still need to have my autonomous mind when I'm doing research. So how do I manage this? Independence. If all of the money comes only from the partner, am I an employee of the partner? Does it make sense? How do I differentiate my posture? And then how do I promote my individual career, which is what university professors do. They are big egos. We are big egos. And even if you were not when you were born, you stay long enough in the academic world, you have to become a big ego, otherwise you're a loser. So there's something like that, you know. I'm old enough to say that today, but my younger colleagues, I feel sorry for what I brought them in today. For the partner, and both for the researcher and the partner, there's always a risk of instrumentalization, to be used by the partner, to go to a direction and not having seen that there were other options. For the partner to feel instrumentalized, so action research, this is the former way to call partnership research. The milieu, the terrain, the partner is a subject, not a co-researcher. Insufficient resources. Some partners are non-for-profit organizations. They cannot pay you to do the research, so someone has to finance this research. On the other hand, the partner may feel exploited because you get your day pay, but the partner coming into the research process, it's not part of her job and doesn't get paid for it. And of course, the possibility that the goals of research drift, because reality is a changing thing for the partner, and we can have a drift of goals. In excellency, it will translate into a selection bias, where we will only pick objects and subjects that can lead to positive impacts. It can lead to methodology bias, where we won't want to see things. We will filter our information. In terms of timeline, we have different times for research. We have students to train. We need to there's a PhD doing the research. The partner doesn't understand what that means, to have a person that is doing a PhD through this research. A lot of the impacts come from the process, but we tend to focus on the results. And we don't take any notes, no observation. Boy, we do have ethnographic talents. We could do that, and I would encourage people to have cahier de bord, your journal of this journey, to have indicators of what happened and how things have changed through the process. And you don't know ahead. You cannot have a logical model, because you're innovating. You don't really know what's going to happen. And it can turn well, and it can turn not so well sometimes. And of course, everything that Peter mentioned, you need to understand what impact is. And are you talking about outputs or impact? If you're talking about impact, then you still want to use the word, and you're in the academic world and you're using this word, you need to use it in an academic way. So an impact needs to be, we need to have a causality link. You need to know that it's your intervention that provoked the impact. There could be implementation problems. Maybe you have a great idea coming out of this research, but public policy doesn't really want to implement it. Just change government and boom, there it goes. Oops, something happened. C'est bon? Okay. So, some issues with the assessment of social impacts of research on social innovation per se. As we mentioned, results from research are unpredictable, as the results from the social innovation are unpredictable, unless you're looking at it ex post. Some research results don't have the impact they wish they had, for example, on public policy. Subject limitations. What impacts? For whom? So, about the social usages of knowledge. There's this great article about the illness of Chaco, which is an illness that kills people in Latin America. But it's in Latin America that you have the best researchers on this illness. They're internationally known because they do such good research on the Charcot illness. But because Charcot illness people who have the illness are so poor, there's no pharmaceutical that will produce the medicine. So you have a beautiful paradox of impact, social impact that is not there, while at the same time you have accent and influence on research. Performity of assessment tools. I think it's Charles Goddard that said, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. So if you aim at the impact, are you forgetting to aim at the results? And are you really doing research? So having impact without research, if the tool brings this, you'll have a deviation of what you wanted to do. And in terms of indicators, I'm a social scientist, how do you assess the impact of a new wave of thoughts, a new theoretical framework, a new conceptualization of the economy, of society, of culture? And again, what impacts for whom? If you're promoting emancipation of dominated groups in the society, maybe it's positive impacts for the dominated group, but not so much for the one who used to dominate it. We all know this. So I suggest, after 30 years maybe of doing partnership research with partners, to understand that we need to build a culture of partnership research. And I'm talking about partnership research because it's one of the indicators in the French National Agency for Research, l'ARES, of social impact. How many social partners do you have? How long have you had them? How many interactions? So there is kind of an implicit link between doing partnership research and having social impact. We need to build a culture. Partners need to understand that they need to be at arm's length from researchers. At some point, I locked my door in my office because I was gathering data, and the partner whom I was calling every week, saying we should discuss this. I'm starting to have interesting data. You should discuss this. Meanwhile, people who were giving me the data were saying, "Are you talking to this partner? Because if you do, I'm not giving you the data." Social world is like that. So I locked the door. 10 years later, everyone is around and happy with the data and everything. But sometimes, you need to understand to leave the researcher. The same way, university needs to keep the funders at arm's length. And that's quite important. I still have professors, I teach in a business school, that say, why don't we have a firm give directly his wage to a professor? I say, well, we don't want it. We don't want this. We want a foundation through which the donator will give the money, and it's university that will manage the jobs. So, but we still have that. I mentioned providing resource to enable the nonprofit partners' participation. This has been asked for in Canada by the social partners. It's a specialized function to translate and arbitrate between the partner and the researcher. Even with a lot of experience, both by the partner and the researcher, there is a moment, and there are moments during the process where you need someone who says, okay, if I understood well, you said this, and if I understood well, you said that. How can I match this? And it's not neither of those. So this specialized function needs to be financed, encouraged, and we need to have it. And it's not to stay in your office and call people to bring money to the university. It's to be partnering in the projects, to be there in the meetings. What did I not already mention? Also, recognizing that reciprocal knowledge transfer between partners and researcher can be a legitimate research methodology. We are not in those years where the social partner was coming out of the forest not knowing how to read or write. A lot of them went to university, have diplomas, they could be in your chair, they just decided to do something else. So you're dealing with sophisticated partners. And the knowledge that they're using sometimes need to be codified, sometimes need to be translated, but there's a richness there's a wealth of information that comes from partners. And people in engineering know that. In social sciences, I think we should know that as well. And of course, we should institutionalize this culture in the academia, in the civil society, including the institutions that educate funds and those that evaluate the performance and impact of research. I also sit on assessment juries for the Tri-Council in Canada, and we look at Canada Research Chair applications in social sciences, engineering, and health sciences. It could be interesting to look at how the rules that we've given ourselves through the years to assess these applications, to ensure that women and indigenous have a say in the program of these research chairs, to understand how the impacts in some disciplines are measured this way and in other disciplines in another way. A little bit like what you were saying, Jack. So a few last thoughts. I think I spent enough time talking about about the conditions for a successful partnership in the academic research world, about conditions for young scholars, because I have this preoccupation to see my young colleagues stay in the academia, come in the academia, and do the type of work that I've been doing. Because if they would just listen to what they think they should be doing, it's to publish an article, and to publish another article, and to publish another article. So you need to make time for this type of research. But it will be worthwhile. At a certain point, you will have an increasing curve of productivity because all of this material becomes exploitable for research with time. It can be very gratifying to not always be in your office alone and feeling that the person next door just doesn't want your article to be published but wants his to be published. So this ambiance in the academic world is not the same when you're with the partner. But still, you want to keep your autonomy and independence and make sure that you're not being stepped over by the partner in this. So to have an agent of partnership, a bureau like a vice rectorate, or that have this competence is quite useful. And of course, we need to, and I'm talking to academic administrators here, some disciplines cannot go in the same way, at the same speed, at the same rhythm in social impact and partnership research. If we were discussing about the discipline, the economists, unfortunately, are going nuts, and you can not ask a young economist to at first start doing this. Some researchers are in a better position to engage in such type of practices, to be established or to have a niche would be an important aspect. Maybe just to end with a positive, negative note. We also have a lot of indicators. I once did the mistake, and instead of going into the database for just this application, I went into the full database. They were asking me enormous, interesting questions about what impact did my research have, what evidence did I have of this impact. I was starting to fill this out. It was taking too long. I said, there's something wrong. And of course, if you have all these indicators, they might be very good, but who will read them? And will you be really evaluated through them? To a point where even those that are compulsory, that we have to look at when we're at the Tri-Council, sometimes, we have interdisciplinary committees. Very fun place to be. we have all these evaluations coming from this committee, and how do you judge one project and eliminate some, you end up looking at the researcher's curriculum. So we need to change our culture and address the institutions that give us the money to do this social impact. They need to understand that we need help to be able to actually implement a social impact grid of analysis of what we're doing. It's not done yet, I don't think so. Thank you.